Holy smokes, Christopher Columbus. That is definitely no way to greet the King and Queen of Spain. What's wrong with you? Okay, all right. So you know how we're trying to find a new trade path to India, right? Right. And the planet is round. Yeah, right. So I'm thinking we just sail the other direction, around the globe, right? Yeah. So I head out. Yeah. and I arrive in India. Yeah. Right wrong, WRONG. I did not make it to India. I really did not. All right, nope. Okay, just get to the point. Did you know there's an entirely different freaking landmass out there? Okay? And why exactly do you think I should care about that? Oh, my bad. Did I fail to mention? There's gold everywhere. Gold. Columbus arrived in Central America in October of 1492, and he had the wildest time of his life. And by that, I mean, he went on a massive robbing and killing spree. He snatched gold, gems, people, and a hammock. Then he came back home flaunting all his stolen loot, including some new and unseen stuff like tobacco, pineapple, turkeys, and, yep, a hammock. Now I know what you're probably thinking. But oversimplified, Columbus didn't really discover America. The Vikings did. And technically, you're not wrong. In the 11th century, Leif Erikson was actually the first European to reach America. But hey, if you're such a Viking fan, then why don't you check out today's awesome sponsor? Vikings War of Clans is a mobile game inspired by legendary strategy and RPG games from the 90s like Age of Empires and Civilization. Do you enjoy city building, gathering stuff, training soldiers, teaming up and going to war? Then trust me, Vikings War of Clans is right up your alley. What makes its world so crazy addictive is that over 20 million real players are always shaping how the game changes, constantly fighting for loot, forming new allies, and jumping into live events. Help support my channel by downloading Vikings for free through my links in the description below, and you'll get a special bonus of 200 gold coins and a defensive shield. Don't forget to search for me and join my Viking crew under the name Oversimplified. Now, where were we? Oh yeah, Columbus. Best time ever. Hammock. And just like that, the race was on to discover and dominate the New World. After a couple centuries of fighting the locals and each other, the European empires had taken over a huge chunk of land, including this region, which both the English and French insisted was theirs. One day, the French said, "We're gonna toss some forts over here." And the English went, "Could you please not?" And the French said, "Oops." But no. I absolutely could not. And so they built their forts anyway, which seriously annoyed the English. So they dispatched a young British lieutenant colonel named George Washington with a mix of British forces and native allies. After a short skirmish, the French leader said, all right, we give up. Okay, fellas, wrap it up, their surrendery slice, oh dang. Was I not supposed to split his skull open with a tomahawk? No big deal. It's not like this will kick off a 7-year-long world war or anything. And then came a 7-year-long world war, which Britain totally won. Football's coming home, plays at the peace table. Spain handed over Florida, while France gave up all of its North American land. But that W came at a cost, a £60 million expense. They were now broke, drowning in debt, and had to figure out some method to repay it. So they went to the colonies and said, all right, listen close. A huge chunk of the war was spent defending you from the French, and now we're out of money because of that. So, I'm not exactly following here, okay? So we spent a ton of money protecting you against the French, right? And now we're completely broke. Awkward silence that really is a pickle. Listen to me. We blew all of our money defending you, and now we need cash. Can you kindly pay us back some money? No? All right. We're just gonna go ahead and tax you. In 1764, Britain passed the Sugar Act, forcing colonists to buy sugar and molasses, only from the British, and to pay fees on them. Then, the following year, they passed the super controversial Stamp Act, and it worked kinda like this. Hello, shopkeeper. Hey, Mr. Bungleberry, here's the deed for your new hut. Stamp. That'll be 3 pence. Thank you. Wait, what was that? It's the new tax. I stamp any paper or document I process, and you have to pay for it. Would you like this pamphlet that explains everything? Yes, please. Cool. Stamp. 2 pence, please. This is horrible. You know what? Just give me a deck of cards so I can go gamble away this misery. All right. No. ... Don't do it. Stamp. Naturally, the colonists were like, yo, my dudes. This new tax thing right here. This is BS. Up until now, they had enjoyed pretty decent freedom to govern themselves. And now suddenly Britain was flexing its authority. They were especially mad because they had 0 reps in Parliament that was pushing taxes on them. So they pushed back. Speakers gave fiery speeches. British items were boycotted, and anyone siding with the British got increasingly bullied. The whole mess started hitting British businesses hard, and after just a few years, Britain had to drop the Stamp Act. But we're still super broke. What now? Let's try taxing the colonies again. Fantastic idea. Wait, didn't we literally just do that, and it blew up in our faces? Man, look at me. I look incredible. Georgie, stop being cheeky, have you ever seen such a good-looking guy? No, sir. Georgie, no way. You're the finest, smartest, most beloved king to ever exist, and everybody adores you. You're doing an amazing job. Ah, Your Majesty? Oh, you're still standing there. Get lost. So in 1766, Britain issued a declaration saying we can do whatever we want, because we're the boss, and you all can suck it. Then they slapped a bunch of new taxes on the Americans through import duties: glass, taxed; lead, taxed; paper, tea, oil, taxed. And yet again, the Americans boycotted British products. British companies felt the squeeze, and the British had to retreat. All right, this is absurd. These are my colonies, and I need to show I'm in control. Repeal all those new taxes, except the one on tea. Also send 1,000 soldiers to Boston to take charge. Oh, and make the colonists foot the bill. And as British troops marched in, the tension in Boston was intense. You could slice it with a blade, and it was all about to explode. On March 5th, a band of local patriots began heckling a British guard at the customs house. More and more Americans joined in the heckling, while more British troops turned up in support of their comrade. Snowballs were thrown at the British. The snowballs turned to rocks, the rocks to oyster shells. The soldiers, outnumbered, panicked. One thing leads to another, and you can see where this is going. Gunshots, 5 civilians were killed. The Patriot pressed throughout the colonies declared the Boston Massacre an unwarranted crime committed against the people of Boston by the cruel British, and the anger continued to grow. A British revenue schooner that ran aground in Rhode Island is burned by the locals. When it came to light that the governor of Massachusetts supported the suppression of the colonists, his house was burned by the locals. And next, the colonists would set their sight on the remaining tax on tea. On December 16, 1773, a band of patriots, known as the Sons of Liberty, disguised themselves as Native Americans, marched down to Boston Harbor, boarded a British merchant ship loaded with tea. And in front of thousands spectators, threw nearly 10,000 pounds worth of tea overboard. The British were disgusted, and they punished Massachusetts with a vengeance. They dissolved its General Assembly, revoked their charter, and sent 3,000 more troops to occupy the city, meaning Boston and Massachusetts were now essentially under the direct rule of Great Britain. And oh boy, were the people pissed. The other colonies saw what was happening, and worried they might be next. So they called a brain trust to decide what to do. 50-6. Delegates from 12 colonies gathered and met in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress, and the roll call read like a who's who of America's finest thinker-sim-talking lawyers. Extraordinaire. Johnny A. and Johnny J., experienced military commander. George Washington, businessman and future alcoholic beverage. Samuel Adams, fiery orator. Patty H. Guy, who married a rich lady. Big J. Dickinson. And while they weren't present at the first Congress, soon named like James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and much later, Alexander Hamilton, would all serve time in the Continental Congress. The question now, though, was what to do about the British. After much bitter debate and disagreement, they eventually agreed on an amazing solution. They would simply ask the British to stop. Can you stop? No. It didn't work. Okay, then tell the local militias to start arming and be ready at a minute's notice. And across the colonies, these Minutemen stood ready for the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. Now having your colonies in open rebellion is one thing. Once they start arming themselves, that's when it really hits the fan. So British General Thomas Gage ordered 700 troops from Boston out into the rebel-controlled Massachusetts countryside to destroy stores of arms and ammunition held by the rebels in Concord. The British set up in the middle of the night. Patriots including Paul Revere rode ahead to warn that the British were coming, giving the rebels time to prepare. The two sides met in Lexington as the sun began to rise. They faced off against each other, and in the confusion, somebody shot first. Gunshots. The shot heard round the world marked the beginning of the American War of Independence. The rebels were outnumbered and had to fall back to Concord as the British slid up to search for rebel supplies. However, more and more patriot rebels kept showing up, and this time it was the British who outnumbered. As more battles flared up in Concord, the most disciplined army in the world was forced to retreat back to Boston by a bunch of local, barely trained militiamen. And all along the British route to Boston, patriot rebels kept gathering and firing on the retreating redcoats. When the British finally got to Boston, the rebel militias surrounded them. Boston and the British were officially under siege, as minor land and naval skirmishes flared around the city, and the British were about to take another humiliating hit. This time it happened up in upstate New York. Colonel Benedict Arnold came up with a plan to capture the British Fort Ticonderoga, which had a huge stockpile of guns and gunpowder. He set off for the fort by himself, planning to recruit troops along the way. He ran into the Green Mountain Boys, led by Ethan Allen, who, as it turns out, had the same exact idea. So they figured they'd join forces. But I'm the boss. No, 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 I'm the boss. This argument went on for a while, until the Green Mountain Boys threatened to dip, and Arnold had to cave. The group attacked the fort at night, while the British soldiers were sleeping, and they caught them totally off guard, seizing the fort and all its weapons with barely any resistance. Wow. Awesome job, Ethan. Super impressive. By the way, whatever happened to that other dude we sent to grab the fort, who Benedict Arnold doesn't ring a bell? Ouch. What the foo? Nobody had any idea what was happening. The colonies were in full-blown rebellion, and somehow they even seemed to be winning. So King George fired General Gage, replaced him with General William Howe, and told him to crush the rebellion immediately. Okay, the British are 100% gonna come back swinging after all this, so we should probably build a proper army. First step, pick a commander-in-chief. And I think we all know that title belongs to the man, the myth, the legend, George Washington. My friends, I'm honored and deeply moved that you'd trust me with such a huge responsibility. I didn't expect this, all right? You've been wearing a military uniform every single day for like 10 months. We all know you were gunning for this, So knock it off, George. Dude, ... not cool. So Washington made his way up to Boston to take command of the brand new Continental Army, just as the British made their first serious effort to end the siege. They planned to capture the high ground on Bunker Hill, but informants tipped off the Continentals about their plan, so they fortified Bunker Hill and dug in on nearby Breed's Hill. The day of the fight arrived, and as the British marched forward, a wave of Continental gunfire slammed into them. Twice they tried to storm the hill, twice they were forced back. The battle dragged on for 3 hours, until the Continentals finally ran out of ammo and had to fall back, letting the British take the hill. While technically a win for the British, they lost nearly 1,000 men compared to the Continentals' 400. The colonists showed the British this wasn't just a temper tantrum. It was warranted. They were ready for it. But one thing they still weren't clear on was why they were even fighting. While a few radicals were starting to toss around the I word, most still hoped they could somehow patch things up with Great Britain. So they sent a message to King George saying, "Hey man, looks like things aren't going your way. Drop the taxes and let's be pals. I'm gonna smack your face. Send that to the colonies, Your Majesty. Your handwriting is awful. Are you sure? Just do I. What does it say? He's gonna ... lick my gross." So for the rest of the year, small battles continued happening across the colony. The British torched the towns of Falmouth, Massachusetts, and Norfolk, Virginia, as revenge for earlier anti-British activities. These acts played perfectly into the hands of patriot propaganda. Overseas, the British were seen as monsters, and the French and Spanish would soon start sending aid to the rebel cause. During this period, there was also minor clashing going on between patriot and loyalist militias in the southern colony. Benedict Arnold was still on a mission to claim some personal fame for himself, so he launched an attempt to invade Canada with a two-pronged strike. The Continentals managed to take some British forts and the city of Montreal, but a brutal snowstorm, with a dash of smallpox, had them beaten and pushed back at Quebec City, and they had to fall back all the way to Fort Ticonderoga. Speaking of which, remember all that artillery and gunpowder? Well, this guy's got an idea for what to do with it. He uses oxen to pull 120,000 pounds of artillery for 2 months through brutal winter, 300 miles all the way to Washington and his Continental armies surrounding Boston. Boom. Washington's got himself some serious firepower, which is great, because up until now his troops had been freezing through the cold winter, not sure when the siege would end. Now they could finally make a move. Washington wanted to launch a full-scale attack on the city, but his junior commanders felt the British were to dug in, and to his credit, Washington was skilled at listening and accepting the input of others. Instead, the Continentals worked through the night, setting the cannons up on Dorchester Heights, overlooking the city. And when the sun rose, and the British saw the artillery, they knew they were done. Their defenses were totally exposed. It was checkmate. They had no option but to abandon the city. 120 ships carried 9,000 redcoats and 2,000 loyalists off to an unknown destiny. Washington had his first victory of the war. Washington then marched his army to New York, knowing that when the British came back, they would probably land there. In the meantime, a kind-looking old man by the name of Thomas Paine had written and printed a pamphlet called Common Sense, in which he pushed for full independence from Great Britain. It spread across the colonies like wildfire. To this day, it remains the best-selling piece in America. It was read aloud in bars and meeting rooms and pulled the idea of independence into the mainstream. Congress started to seriously consider the idea. Thomas Jefferson was picked to draft an official Declaration of Independence, and he didn't hold back, writing that all men are created equal, with certain inalienable rights. Of course, Jefferson owned over 100 slaves, but we don't have to get into that. On July 2nd, Congress voted unanimously in support of independence, and John Adams declared that July 2nd would go down as the most remembered day in American history. Then, a few days later, independence officially kicked in. The United States of America was born. There was no going back now. The Americans ripped down a statue of King George in New York and melted it into 42,000 musket rounds. To the British, it was rebellion, and if the king had his way, Washington and all of Congress would be executed. Speaking of the British, guess who's returned? The king sent a massive force of 130 warships and 25,000 soldiers to New York. Washington knew that facing the strongest military in the world wouldn't be simple. The British set up base on Staten Island, as the Americans dug into fortified positions around Brooklyn Heights, waiting for an invasion to come. But the British just waited, wearing down their opponent's resolve while boosting their own strength. At one point, they unleashed a huge, terrifying artillery barrage and then said, "You know, if I were you right now, I'd probably beg for peace." But Washington told them to shove it. The Americans kept holding on for what was coming, and when it finally landed, it hit hard. 15,000 British troops stormed the American position, and the two sides blasted at each other in giant rows. But what the Americans hadn't realized was, they were only fighting a distraction. The main British force was circling to hit the Americans from the rear, and when they struck, they caused heavy losses. The Americans freaked out and pulled back to Brooklyn Heights, where they quickly found themselves trapped between the British Army and the river. It looked like the war was already finished, but luckily, instead of charging, the British chose to dig in for a siege, and then a thick fog rolled in, allowing Washington's troops to slip across the river unharmed. The British kept chasing and clashing with the Americans in Manhattan, and the Americans faced defeat after defeat after defeat. It was a catastrophe. Washington's command was brought into question, as thousands of American POWs were left to rot as criminals. Washington's troops ran through New Jersey, all the way down to Pennsylvania. Rarely had an army been so badly crushed, yet managed to survive for another fight. Music